Alright, YouTube, because I've done this in the past, it's now time for the Styxhexenhammer Christmas slash Saturnalia slash Solstice celebrations video. Happy holidays to everyone. I'll say happy holidays. I don't care if other people tell me Merry Christmas. I'll say Merry Christmas back because it's their own holiday. I thought I would cover the topic of like the war on Christmas and things like that that I traditionally cover. My view on this is essentially people should worship however they want. They should celebrate whatever holiday that they want. I don't even, and I'll go further than most atheists on this. Most atheists have a problem with seeing any mention of Christmas sort of in the public square. At least some of the new wave atheists, the particularly hardline groups. And my thought is that it doesn't really bother me to see nativity scenes and stuff. It's not a form of convert seeking, really. It's just sort of their own celebration, any more than it would bother me if I saw people putting up, pictures of Saturn or something like, or Odin or something like that. I mean, it's not overtly trying to preach to people. They're just sort of putting their own celebratory stuff up. Um, and as much as I don't like Abrahamism, which is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, I stand strongly against all three. As much as I don't like that, I dislike the politically correct stuff more. Um, and to tell the truth, with my own spiritual beliefs being what they are, I have my own significance that I attach to things like the solstice. I may not believe in Jesus. I don't even believe that this figure, strictly speaking, even existed. But I have no problem with people who believe that. If they're being assholes about it, like there's a difference in my mind between a Christian who wants to call it Christmas, thinks that Jesus existed and that he was born on this Christmas day. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with Christians wanting to go to church. I have no problem with Christians wanting to go around even necessarily preaching to people on the street. I think it's objectionable. It's stupid. It's not going to work most of the time. It actually just annoys people most of the time. But they have the right to do that. I don't even really care because I can do the same thing if I feel inclined to do so. I put my views out more online, but if I felt like it, I could take a bunch of leaflets and I could go parading around the city preaching to anyone who would listen about, my beliefs. The only thing that I have a problem with is the presence of such a thing in a public edifice in which there is involuntary membership in, such as public education. Children are made to go to schools. If it's a religious school, it's different. Nobody has a problem with that. But in a public school, a public secular school run by the government, there shouldn't be any mention of specific religious holidays. I think Christmas almost, though, the way it's celebrated isn't even a religious holiday necessarily. And certainly the way that you see it portrayed, certainly in a school, because they're taken over by political correctness, and even more so in general in the public square, is more along, it's severely Americanized, it's corporatist, it's a fusion model, it's got some aspects of Christian worship in it, the idea of, giving being loosely related to the giving of Jesus, eternal life to people who believe in him or whatever. But then you have things like Santa. Santa is a pagan figure. It's very, very, very loosely tied to I believe, a Turkish saint. But the figure that is most often portrayed and its attributes in the United States is purely the early 1900s Coca-Cola ad. The Coca-Cola ads invented the modern conception of Santa. There was a time in this country, and all the war on Christmas people don't seem to understand this, that Christmas was banned in the United States. It was seen as a bad thing because to the Puritans, that sort of celebration was not in keeping with actual Christian tenets, which is something people don't understand. The problem is the early 1900s, and I discussed this on my blog as it relates to marijuana prohibition, but I'll discuss it here as well. The early 1900s, late 1800s too, saw a wave of moralism in the United States. Moralism being attached to the idea of getting rid of gambling, prohibiting alcohol, going after other narcotic substances. Marijuana was one of the first that was included there as a so-called poisonous substance. Cocaine followed the same way, laudanum, opiates, things like that. The eugenics movement was tied into it. So you've got to understand, when you look today at American moralism as it relates to Christianity, you're looking at the 1910s and 1920s way of life. You're looking at stump preaching and preaching against, preaching a dry lifestyle, no drugs, nothing like that, no gambling. Those are considered sinful, even though they're not really banned, certainly in the Bible. You see this tendency to relate early 1900s Americana with a religious lifestyle, which they preach as genuinely Christian. You wouldn't see that in other countries. You don't see that in Europe. They have their own celebrations. There's overt pagan references in all of these European countries. Nobody has a problem with those pagan references in those European countries. They look at it as a cultural phenomenon. That's indeed what we do in the United States, or I should say the Christians do. The religious, so-called religious festival of Christmas that they celebrate with the gifts and so forth is not religious. I don't think it should be banned, and I don't even think they should ban Christmas in public schools. It's not a religious celebration. Santa Claus is not a religious figure. Giving gifts is not a religious tradition directly from Christianity. Actually, if you look, it comes more from Norse paganism. But nobody really cares about that. It's not being celebrated as a religious festival for most of the people that are partaking it. There are zealous Christian groups that actually spurn that idea of Christmas. They don't use Christmas trees. They detest Santa. They actually term it Satan Claus. And they celebrate a very literal birth of Jesus scenario. Obviously, you don't want that in your public schools. That's no different than the principal coming on the PA system and announcing that you'll have morning prayer before the pledge. But Christmas, the way it is generally celebrated, even things like manger scenes, almost are divorced from their religious connotations around this time of year, because everyone is going out and buying gifts, and they're singing carols and so forth, even people who are not Christian. The way it's celebrated has transmogrified from a primarily religious holiday, Americana, to a more corporatist holiday, and the corporations were more than happy to see that happen. But let's remember the real reason for the season. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about Christmas as a Christian celebration, or Saturnalia, or Yule, or any of these other things. The real reason is the solstice. It's celebrated on the 25th because there were other also important celebrations in Rome around that time. The Christians simply stole the date, whereas the actual solstice falls several days earlier. But it is essentially celebrating the return of the sun. The idea of the resurrection of the Son of God from the Bible is almost uncannily resembling the idea of the return of the literal sun, the resurrection of the literal sun from some far northern region where it totally disappears on the shortest days of the year and doesn't rise at all. It's very uncannily similar. And most of the tenets of Christmas, from Santa Claus being dressed in red and white, to the reindeer flying around, to everything, is related to the consumption of drugs and pagan things, which came far beyond Christianity. They existed long before Christianity did. Pointing out, of course, that there is some reason to believe there never was a Jesus. But if people want to believe that, I don't care. They can do whatever they want. I don't care if it's in public, because, like I said, being politically correct as a society appeals far less to me than allowing moralists, however crazed they happen to be, to practice in the public square. I don't care if they put up a manger scene. It doesn't bother me one bit. I see a manger scene, I just go buy it. I don't suddenly start foaming at the mouth like some people do and saying, well, this shouldn't be in public. This is a public display of religion. It's like public display of religion has become worse than public display of affection back when you were in kindergarten. It's ridiculous. So let the kids have their candy canes and give each other gifts and have a Santa Claus. I don't care. While you're at it, why don't they simply teach these children the reality behind this time of year. Teach them that the solstice just happened, the sun is coming back. Here are a dozen different cultures, each celebrating their own holiday. Teach them about it. You don't have to tell them to practice them, or believe in these gods, or pray to these gods. Teach them comparative religion. It's as simple as that. Have a pluralistic system. Let them learn about something that is true. It is true that these groups worship in this way on this particular date without dragging in the connotation that they have to be a part of it somehow. That they need to be morally inclined to worship Jesus or Odin or Saturn or some other figure. Don't get into any of that. Let them celebrate and teach them about all these things. They do this for culture all the time. You know, you teach them about the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Well, that's a religious holiday. It's a religious holiday. They teach it because it happens to be a culture outside the United States, so it's okay. They teach them about all sorts of Shintoist traditions in school. I can remember back when I was in elementary school, quite some time. This is back in the 1990s, by the way, which makes me feel old. I'm not that old, thankfully. I'm still in my 20s. But we teach them about all these foreign cultures and about their traditions. But when it comes to Christmas itself, we are self-hating. Well, I don't have any problem with the fact that the United States, up until extremely recently, until the last 5 to 10 years, was overwhelmingly Christian. I don't have a problem with children being taught the Christian meaning of Christmas, as long as they are alongside that being taught all these other reasons that this particular time frame was important to all of these other ancient groups, to the Norse, to the Roman religious groups, certain of their mystery schools and so forth, and all sorts of other groups. It doesn't matter. They should be learning the truth. By truth, I don't mean some supposedly objective truth about the spiritual nature of the universe. I mean the history behind it. Teach them. Because then, if they see something they like, who should care if these kids want to, worship Jesus or worship Odin or Satan or some other figure? It doesn't matter. It's like now the new thing is they have a big to-do if some kid walks into a school with a cross. Well, guess what? I saw people wearing crosses in school. It didn't matter. They have the right to do that. Just because they're under 18 doesn't mean they get stripped of their rights. And they themselves are not a part of the school system that is serving an administrative function. So it's not including church and state in one by having a student wearing a religious symbol by their own volition. It's no different than if someone walked in with a Wiccan pentagram or the hammer of Thor around their neck. I think political correctness is far worse than moralism. I think it will destroy any society that it touches. I think the politically correct bullshit movement is far more harmful to this country and every other country that it's been in. And we can see the fruits of this in Sweden and Britain right now, and I'll get to that in a moment. We can see the fruits of the politically correct shit, and it's worse than the moralism. Moralism is bad enough. It's bad enough to have a society in which you have some hegemonic religious group oppressing others. It's even worse when it's being politically correct that is oppressing other people. You see this in Sweden and Britain right now. There's uncontrolled immigration into their countries from the third world. It's crushing their economies. There are very real problems being spawned right now in urban parts of Britain and Sweden as a result of letting millions and millions of Islamists into their countries. And the population, according to the polls, has already stood up and said they oppose more immigration. And in fact, some of these people would like to deport all of these immigrants. The reason being that they're screwing up these urban centers. Crime is rising. There are all sorts of other problems. There's trash everywhere. Some of these people are illiterate, and they're living off the state. And we don't need to have that happen in the Western world. So much as I dislike moralism, much as I dislike Christianity itself, except in its most liberal of forms, like the Unitarians don't give a shit what you do. Well, they're fine in my book. They're barely even really adhering to an evangelical sentiment in the first place, so it's not really a problem. As bad as those moralists can be, a proper interpretation of our Constitution completely prevents them from oppressing people. And we're seeing the fruits of that now. Gay marriage is spreading out. Atheism is continuing to grow. The abortion debate is going the way of the dinosaur. You haven't heard a lot about that debate recently, except that when some right-wing candidate trashes abortion, they don't get reelected. And that's the reason why they're shutting up about it, because it's more or less now a closed issue. We're winning the fight for gay equality. It's almost won. I think the next step, and people will probably say I'm crazy for suggesting this, will be polygamy. I think the next step in the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see polygamy become legal and state recognized in this country. Some people say, well, that's slippery slope and polygamy is bad, but gay is okay. I don't have a problem with polygamy. I think if people want to be polygamous or in a polyamorous circle and marry multiple partners, they should be able to do so. I don't have a problem with that. It's not my right to complain because it doesn't affect me. So since we're already winning these battles, and it's being won mostly, as I pointed out before, because of the internet, why do we need to worry about the moralists? They're a dying breed, they're slowly dying out, they're losing power. That doesn't mean that we need to invite the PC police into our country, because they're ruining other countries that have had that phenomenon going on for a longer period of time. It's ruining their countries. It's turning the tyranny of moralism into the tyranny of anti-moralism, which is just as bad. In fact, it can be worse, because rather than a religious group that's controlled by the state oppressing people through the state, it's the state itself acting on its own volition and oppressing people. So this Christmas / Yule / Saturnalia / whatever the hell else you want to call it, celebrate it the way you want. And if I see manger scenes, it's not going to bother me any more than if someone puts out a plate of spaghetti and meatballs and says it's the flying spaghetti monster. Because to me, it all sounds the same. All of these religious beliefs are all about the same. I happen to be a pagan. Does that mean that I think Odin literally sits up in the sky and Thor is beside him with a hammer shooting down lightning bolts? No. That's just the way I look at it. I would much rather have people enjoy the holidays however the hell they want to do it, as long as they're not hurting anybody else or pushing themselves on small children in, a place that they're dragged to involuntarily, like a school. It does not matter. This is a pluralistic society. It does work. It's working. We see it working right now. Good wins out in the end against both the PC police and the moralists. And hopefully the people in Sweden and Britain and so forth will grow some balls and kick out the PC police, kick out the immigrants, and take back their countries too. You do not need to be moralist to be opposed to crazed immigrants coming into your nation, which, by the way, they're just a different form of moralist. You don't even have to be completely secularized. You can mix it up. People have different views. Here's the ultimate thing I want you to take away from this. If you believe that your religious views, or lack thereof, atheistic views, are superior, if you believe that they're more reasonable, that there's better evidence behind them than all the other groups, then you shouldn't mind competing with these other groups, because in your belief, if your beliefs are truly superior, they're going to win. They're going to spread faster and larger and eventually take over everything. If they're superior, if that's truly what you believe, and it turns out to be true, then you will win. That's why it's Darwinism at its finest. Religions undergo evolution. They undergo natural selection. I've said it for years. You see them. They either change or they die out or they grow because they've been somehow improved. That's the way it works. So that's simply what I want people to take away from this video. So again, happy holidays. Yule, Saturnalia, Christmas, Feast of Satan, whatever the hell you happen to celebrate. Myself, I'm going to drink a beer. I'm going to eat lots of cookies. And probably troll people all night. That's my religion. My religion is trolling.